Hello, humans. This last week, there was some discussion on one of the groups I'm in on Facebook about the superior doctor and, quotes about that from Neijing and from other places. I've been interested in these quotes. I've been collecting them for a while, but I finally decided to put them all in one place, make a slideshow. So I had some already translated, and then I translated whatever else I found. And, thanks to the group, some people mentioned passages that I hadn't thought about. And so I put together this little slideshow. There's a few common themes that go through it. So it's not only about different types of practitioners, including sages, which may not actually be practitioners, and doctors. And, it's about treating before disease is visible. And it's also got a lot of themes about governance, which, might surprise some of you. So yeah, these are the themes. Medicine and statecraft, medicine and governance of a country have some very common techniques, in common with each other. And as a government official, you can actually influence the health and well-being for, a huge number of people, the masses, by making, maybe we could call it public health policy, and by being benevolent and by caring about them. As a doctor, of course, we can promote health for individuals. So, which is preferable? Some people actually thought a government official was preferable, but a doctor was their second choice. Both are extremely virtuous as long as you're promoting health and trying to get rid of disease. Also, treating what is not ill is better than treating disease. So that's Yangsheng, or nourishing life, or that's prevention of disease progression. And then there are different levels of practitioners based on their skill. And there's a lot of discussion about diagnostic techniques, because, how can you prevent a disease, or how can you treat a patient before symptoms show up, to prevent something from getting worse? How can you do that if you can't diagnose them at an early time? So these are the kind of themes that we're going to be seeing. And I do want to say that these, quotes come from very early times. The latest one is about 1,000 years ago. And I spend more time in the Ming Dynasty, which is, 500 years ago, not 1,000 years ago. So this Chinese language is hard for me, but fortunately, pretty much all of this stuff is translated. So I retranslated it. I didn't just copy somebody else's translation, but I could still look and see what somebody else thought a passage was about. Okay, there's a word that we need to understand as we're going through this word "zhi." And I make it in red every place it occurs in the slideshow, both in English and in Chinese, but it's a word that you cannot translate the same every time you come across it. So, we're most familiar with it as practitioners of Chinese medicine, because when we say to treat a patient, it's this word "zhi." But it also means good governance of a country, to make order, to make peace, to rule properly, to govern properly. And I believe, it has the water radical, and there's this important, myth, or maybe it's actually grounded in real history, but that China had so many floods in 3, 4, 5,000 years ago. I don't know how long ago. And it was flooding all the time, and that was making famine, and, people were refugees from the floods, and, all kinds of bad stuff happening. And then there was this ruler who's supposed to be the beginning of the Shang dynasty, I think, or the Shah dynasty. Anyway, Yu, or Yu the Great. regulated, he dredged the rivers and regulated the waterways and got everything flowing well. And so he was considered like an amazing ruler. And so this word jur, actually, it seems its original meaning is to regulate the waterways, which was good governance at the time. But we can also think of the waterways as like chi and blood flowing, the rivers in our body of chi and of blood. So it's an interesting word with a lot of meanings. And so, like I said, I translate it differently in different contexts, but I always made it red in this slideshow, so it's that word jur. And so this is from the Warring States period, which is like, you know, pre-Han. This is like, from 2,500 years ago, or, 2,300 years ago. I don't know exactly when this Lucia Chuncho was, written. I don't know exactly when, but it says in it, making order in the body, uh, along with treating the country, is the same principle, a skill of the same principle. So here, how have I translated it? Making order in the body and making order in the country are techniques based on the same principle. Of course, I could translate it treating the body and governing the country are techniques based on the same principle. But at least in this first one, I wanted to show you how it's the same word. By the way, even though we often translate this as treat in terms of the body, but it also can mean like regulating, things so there's no problem, which isn't always a medical treatment. Regulating the body can be our lifestyle, our diet, sleep and rest and activity, exercise, and stuff like that. So this word really has a broad array of meanings and is very important for us. Another history book that seems to be from the same time period, although less is known about the author of this book and so forth. It uses a Chinese literary device. It says, superior doctors doctor the country. You can see this word is repeated. The first time it's a noun, a doctor, and the second time it's a verb, to doctor something, to treat something. I mean, so I could translate this: superior doctors treat the country. But, it repeats in Chinese, so I repeat it in English. Okay, second best, people doctor the sick. So the highest level of medicine is doctoring the country, and the second level of medicine is doctoring a sick person. Because, as I said, when you are a government official and you can make policy for the country, then you can affect, hopefully positively, the health of so many people all over. And as a doctor, you can only affect the health of one person at a time, which is a wonderful thing. And I'd rather be a doctor than a government official, but you can see this goes back really far, comparing governing the country with regulating the body. And so now we get to Suen, Huangdi Neijing Suen. Chapter 2 has this extremely famous passage, and you can see it uses the word zhi like 5 times. And here I'm going to translate it differently depending on the context. Sages, and I'm going to talk about sages in a minute, but sages don't treat what is ill. They treat what isn't ill. That sounds weird, right? They don't make order in something that's chaotic. They keep order, so nothing gets chaotic. This is the meaning. To give medicine after disease has developed, or to make order after something has become chaotic, is pretty stupid. It's like becoming thirsty and then saying, oh, I better dig a well. Or it's like starting a fight and then saying, oh, I don't have enough weapons. Can you make me some real quick? It's a bit late, isn't it? So again, there's this word, sure. And Actually, this isn't treat in the sense of, oh, I'm going to give you acupuncture and herbs. This is, regulate. And so note that it says sages, it doesn't say doctors. And so, of course, a doctor could be a sage, but what it's talking about is like really wise people don't wait until they get sick to take care of what needs to be taken care of. They take care of it in advance so they're not going to get sick. A good ruler is a sage ruler isn't going to wait until the country's having, revolts and revolutions and chaos and famine. They're going to keep, by good governance, they're going to keep the country in good order, which means, good order promotes more good order. Nobody's going to rebel if everybody has everything they need. So this is talking about taking care of things at an early stage rather than waiting until they become chaotic. But noting that this is talking about sages and not doctors, it's not really talking about medical treatment. It's talking about self-regulation and teaching others to take care of their health. So it's about Yang or nourishing life. Another chapter, Sue Wen, chapter 26, says upper level practitioners relieve disease when it first sprouts, relieve things when it first sprouts. They don't wait for it to get big and out of hand. They, see something starting to sprout. I mean, this is literally sprouts. Um, and so the inception at the very beginning, they relieve disease or they relieve imbalance. They first observed the chi of the Sanbu Joho, which is this pulse technique where you read the pulse in 9 different positions in the body. This was a technique that was mentioned. There are 3 pulse techniques in Neijing, and this is one of the 3, but very few people try to use it today. Feeling the pulse in 9 different places. So, it's still, they first observe the pulses chi. They do their best to regulate before things break down in order to relieve the disease. So they're upper level practitioners. This doesn't use the word doctor, it uses gong, which is like a worker or a craftsperson. Lower level practitioners relieve those who have already developed disease and relieve what is broken down. Relieving those who have developed disease means they have no awareness of defects in the Sanbu Joho. So it's like they either don't know how to read Sanbu Joho or they're not so good at it. So they aren't aware of problems because they're not good at pulse reading. So the patient breaks down due to illness. I want to talk about one choice of words. This word I is it means literally defeat, like a military defeat, and it also can mean to spoil. And I really spent some time thinking about the right word in this context. Defeat in a medical sense, well, yeah, you can get the idea, it's a bad outcome, but it's not so straightforward. And spoil to me sounds like something's rotting. Excuse me. And, while that may be the case in some place, somebody has gangrene or something like that, but most of the time it's not literally spoiling or rotting. So I chose broken down because things can break down in so many different ways. Your refrigerator can break down, your car can break down, your body can break down, which is more non-specific. So I know some people would quibble with me about that translation, but later we'll see this same word again. And throughout this slideshow, I always translate it as broken down, breakdown, something like that. Okay, so upper level practitioners are good at pulse diagnosis, so they recognize something when it's just at the sprout. And it hasn't grown into a big, large weed. And so then they can treat early, whereas lower level practitioners can't recognize disease until it's just right in their face. And so the patient suffers more because things are breaking down. Ling Shu has similar language to the previous slide. It's talking about when disease first sprouts, it's really very similar. So upper level practitioners seize qi. What does that mean? I figure it must be that they seize the evil qi. And so they relieve disease when it first sprouts, like wind attacks, and they instantly get it out before it has a chance to even cause fever and chills. Lower level practitioners watch over those who have developed disease, which causes breakdown of the patient's body. They're like watching over the patient, but they haven't really figured it out. So the disease is developing and the patient's body is breaking down. Ling Shu chapter 4 refers to 3 types of diagnosis. In Neijing, they have 3 different types of pulse diagnosis, at least 3 types. They use facial diagnosis, the colors in the face. And there's also forearm diagnosis, which I don't know anyone who still does that. But the 2 forearms were broken down into different regions, meaning different things, and you'd palpate it and as part of the diagnosis to figure out where is the problem and what is the problem. So the point is, though, like there are different levels of diagnosis, and the more different methods of diagnosis, and the more methods that you are good at, the better your diagnostic ability. So this passage says someone who can combine all 3 diagnostic techniques can be taken as an upper level practitioner. Upper level practitioners achieve 9 out of 10 cures. So, wow, if you're the highest level of practitioner, you can cure 9 out of 10 patients. Someone who can do 2 diagnostic techniques is a mid-level practitioner, and mid-level practitioners can cure 7 out of 10 of their patients. Someone who can do 1 diagnostic technique is a lower level practitioner. Lower level practitioners achieve 6 out of 10 cures. That's still a pretty good rate for curing people, depending on what they have. So today, even though we don't do forearm diagnosis, but we do tongue diagnosis, which was not in Neijing at all. And so we still have 3 levels, although I know a lot of modern people don't spend a lot of time with facial diagnosis, but we still have 3 methods. So maybe we could still use this kind of idea. Ling Shu chapter 5. Upper level practitioners ping qi. Ping can mean to calm, it can mean to make level. So it doesn't literally mean balance, but that seems to be, calming qi or balancing qi, making the qi level rather than all jagged and shooting up and counterflowing and doing other kinds of things. So upper level practitioners can make the qi flow appropriately. Mid-level practitioners make chaos in the vessels, but the same word that means vessels also means pulse. So, if you disrupt the vessels, you're going to disrupt the pulse. Lower level practitioners exhaust qi and endanger life. So it said you should be cautious, you should be careful of going to these lower level practitioners, right? Okay. Ling Shu 55 also talks about upper and lower level practitioners. Sometimes they have 3 levels, sometimes they have 2. This one has 2. So upper level practitioners prick before the disease exists. So pricking, they used bleeding therapy a lot, and they also in Neijing used acupuncture with the fine needle. The word prick can apply to either. So it's not clear. Well, maybe if I read the whole chapter, and maybe it would be clear, but sometimes it's just not clear in Neijing. Is this talking about pricking to bleed, or is this talking about acupuncture with a fine needle? But the point is that upper level practitioners treat before disease exists. Next, they prick or they treat before disease flourishes. So if you can't get there before the disease exists, at least get there before the disease is at its peak. Next, they prick once disease is waning, so they're kind of telling you don't prick when the disease is at its peak. Don't, which sounds strange to me, but this is, what Ling Shu says. Lower level practitioners prick when the disease has just attacked, so it's really strong now, or when the disease is flourishing, it's at its peak in the patient's body, or when the pulse is contrary to the disease. So what's that all about? There's certain types of pulses that indicate that the patient has a poor prognosis. And one of them is that all their signs and symptoms seem out of line with their pulse, that the pulse and the signs and symptoms don't match with each other. That's a poor prognosis. So that's what this is saying. Lower level practitioners don't recognize the disease early enough, so they wait until it's full blown, or they don't even recognize that the pulse is not in harmony with the disease. And so, yeah. Okay. It continues. This is the same passage. Thus, it is said, right at the moment when disease is flourishing, do not dare to injure the patient, meaning don't prick them. Prick when disease is waning to make the situation very beneficial. I don't know if this is how we think today, but this is what Ling Shu said. Thus, it is said, upper level practitioners treat what isn't ill. They don't treat what is ill. This is the meaning. Again, we have this word treat. What this is saying, and I'm not saying we have to agree, but treat early or treat at the end of disease, but don't treat when it's full blown. I don't know about that. Okay, we're moving on to Nanjing, although we may have some more from Neijing. So Nanjing is a book that was written later than Neijing, but still like at the end of the Han Dynasty. And many people say it's a commentary on Neijing. I personally think it has a common ancestor with Neijing, but it's a different school of thought. It's so different than what's in Neijing, even if it does quote from it at times. Anyway, so chapter 77 is also called the 77th difficult issue or the 77th difficulty. It says the classic, which people take to mean referring to one part of Neijing, which it may or may not. The classic says upper level practitioners treat what isn't ill. Mid-level practitioners treat what is ill. What does that mean? Nanjing always asks questions, and then it gives an answer starting with Zhan. It's like this. Treating what isn't ill is seeing a disease of the liver and knowing that the liver will transmit it to the spleen, because, wood easily attacks earth, wood controls earth. So this, practitioner will first fill up spleen qi, so it won't receive the evil of the liver. In other words, if the spleen is strong, then the liver's not going to attack it. That's why the classic says treating what isn't ill. Mid-level practitioners treat what is ill by seeing disease of the liver and failing to understand this concept of transmission that it's going to transmit to the spleen. So they only focus on treating the liver. And so this is called treating what is ill. The liver's ill, they only treat the liver. The spleen isn't yet ill, but the higher level practitioner will treat the spleen to prevent the attack of the liver. And again, look, this word "to treat" is here so many times. There's a very similar passage in Shanghan Lun, chapter 1, although it goes on a lot longer than this, but I didn't go on with the rest of it. I'll tell you what the rest of it is after I go through this. Someone asked, how do upper level practitioners treat what isn't ill? And the teacher said, which is probably Zhang Zhongjing, treating what isn't ill is seeing illness of the liver and knowing the liver will transmit it to the spleen. So they first fill up the spleen. That part, pretty much the same. And then it has, this probably should be in parentheses, but the spleen is at its peak during the transition between seasons. And so when it's at its peak, it's strong and it won't receive evils. So, like, there's this earth period of time between each season. And at that point, the spleen is at its strongest. So it's more safe at that time. So these, superior practitioners, these upper level practitioners don't supplement the spleen at that time that's associated with Earth in the calendar. Okay. Mid-level practitioners don't know about this transmission thing. So when they see an illness of the liver, they don't understand about filling up the spleen. So they only treat the liver. It's pretty much the same idea. But this goes on after this. If you're interested, you should go look it up. And it starts talking about what flavor herbs to use in such a situation and how each flavor does a particular thing to rebalance the situation. And it talks about, how disease is transmitted through the system according to 5 elements and stuff like that. So it's an interesting passage, but the rest got beyond this idea of upper level practitioners and so forth. Nanjing chapter 61 says, okay, so now we're talking about diagnosis again, but now we've got the 4 methods of diagnosis that we're taught in school today, and it's not mentioning forearm diagnosis. That was in Beijing. I don't think that's in Nanjing, although I could be wrong. So the 61st difficulty says, the classic says, someone who can know by looking is called a shen, a spirit or a god or a deity. Someone who can know from listening is called a sage. Someone who can know from asking is called a gong, a practitioner. The one, when I've been saying high level and mid level and lower level practitioners. And someone who can know from feeling the pulse is called a craftsperson, which is this other word we haven't come across yet. What does this mean? So this is not a quote from Neijing, but it says the classic says, so they must have either a different copy because things were hand copied, or maybe they're referring to a different book that's been lost. Anyway, so what are these 4 levels of practitioners? So Nanjing answers is like this. Someone who knows from looking observes the 5 colors in order to get a diagnosis for the disease. Someone who knows from listening hears the 5 tones, like the sound in their voice and so forth, to differentiate disease. Someone who knows from asking inquires about preferences of the 5 flavors, like do you like sweet or sour or salty, to know where the disease began and where it's located now. Someone who knows from feeling the pulse diagnoses the zunko, the pulse at the radial artery, evaluating deficiency or excess to know the disease and to know in which zangfu the disease is located. So in Neijing, I told you there are 3 methods of pulse taking. There's also the Renying Tsunko method, where you feel the pulse at the throat and compare it to the pulse at the wrist. There's the Sanbu Joho that we saw before, and then there's just the radial artery. But chapter 1 of Nanjing, the first thing it says is forget all those other methods, only take the pulse at the radial artery. So, here it's doing that. And that's pretty much advice that most people have followed ever since then. It's interesting, though, that they're putting pulse diagnosis here at the lowest level. That's so surprising. Anyway, it goes on. The classic says, knowing it from the outside is called sage-like, but knowing it from the inside is called spirit-like, a spirit-like. This is the meaning. Yeah. So how do we know it from, what's the difference between knowing it from the outside and knowing it from the inside? It seems like all of these methods of diagnosis, looking and listening and, um, you know, palpating and asking are all from the outside, but you know, that's what the book says. If you have comments and you can enlighten me, please feel free to comment. Okay, so all of that stuff up until now was Han Dynasty and pre-Han Dynasty. But everybody loves Sun Tzu Miao, and he wrote a lot of really nice stuff in Chen Fang. And so he said, upper level doctors doctor the country. We saw that before from the spring and autumn book, Chuncho. Yeah. Mid-level doctors doctor the person. Lower level doctors doctor the disease. So I kind of like that. You know, doctoring the person is taking everything into account. Doctoring the disease is just, I mean, it's almost like car repair. You're just looking at the parts that you need to fix and not looking at the whole thing. Okay. Finally, another thing from Sun Tzu Miao. This is a little bit different. It's not about the different levels of doctoring, but this is again going back to comparing the person's health and the person's body to a country. So this says a person's body shares the image of a country. They're got same principles of how to take care of them. The position of the chest and abdomen is like a palace because all the government officials, the Zhangfu, are inside the palace. Each of the four limbs is like an outlying territory because it moves far away and they're not the government officials there. This one, I wasn't quite sure how to translate this word fun here, but anyway. The branches of the bones and joints are like the 100 officials. These would be like the lower government officials, not the high level ones like the military general and the emperor and so forth. The spirit is like the sovereign. Blood is like the ministers. Qi is like the citizens of this country. So when you know how to treat the body, you can govern the country. Also, if you know how to govern the country, you can treat the body. But again, remember, this doesn't really mean treat like treating a patient. It means to regulate so everything's going smoothly in this context. The result of loving his citizens is pacifying his country. If you love the citizens, and remember the citizens were Qi, if you love the citizens of the country the country will be peaceful. The result of caring for his chi is perfecting his body, right? So here's like the same thing on the country level, and here's the same thing on the body level. But if the citizens scatter, the country's going to perish. And if chi is exhausted, because chi was like the citizens, then the body dies. And finally, this is not a real quote. This is from a long story that I'm not gonna, put in this slideshow, but this is kind of like punchline. This is the Chengyu of this story. So there was a prime minister named Fan Zhongyan, and he's apparently pretty famous. I've had people who said, "Oh yeah, I read about him when I was in school." So you can see his dates, Northern Song Dynasty. So like almost 1,000 years ago, or some of it was more than 1,000 years ago. He, when he was young, he was a very diligent student and he was studying really hard to pass the imperial exams. And he went to get a divination in a temple to find out, I want to be the prime minister. Can I be the prime minister? And the divination said no. And it was actually wrong, but it said no. And then he asked about, well, can I be a doctor? And it still said no. And then people said, that's so weird. Why is your job choices either a minister or a doctor? And he said, if I'm a minister, I can help everyone, including the emperor above me and the people below me. And then I can help everyone be happy and healthy. But if I can't do that, then if I'm a doctor, at least I can help the people around me, both above and below me, my parents and the common people below me and so forth. And so this became a very famous saying. If I cannot be a good minister, I will be a good doctor. Okay, so hopefully all of us listening to this will be good doctors. And that's my slideshow for today.